Here tonight with Chris Thursten and Holly Johnstone from Hypixel Studios. There are Hypixel heroes from Belfast. So I'm going to jump right in. So you guys give us a little bit of an introduction to yourselves, the story of Hypixel itself, and what your roles in that story are.
Yeah, sure. So you joined before I did.
Okay, all right. Chris, I've been at Hypixel Studios for 4.5 years now in a variety of roles. I think I joined the team when it was about 25 people initially to help announce Hytale, which is the game that we're working on. And in the course of that journey, I've done a bunch of different things on the comms, marketing, publishing, narrative side. Words is the short version, if it involved a word. But obviously, and Holly will speak to this, we've grown tremendously. We're almost 110 plus now, and so my role now is narrative and editorial lead, basically. So I'm responsible for the writing as a discipline at the studio and also kind of narrative design and world building for Hytale.
Yeah, I'm Holly. I look after global talent acquisition for Hypixel. I've been here since May of 2020, so just coming up on 3 years now. And essentially a bit of the story, I suppose, of the origins of Hypixel is on Hypixel is on the modern side of Minecraft called Hypixel Network. And that was initially founded by two Canadians called Simon Collins O'Flynn and Philip Touchette. And essentially what they did was created YouTube videos to promote their Minecraft adventure maps. They decided then to create a server to kind of allow players to come and join, I suppose, the adventure maps and bring those to life for players. And then the concept was, when we created the server, we would create mini games to keep players occupied while they were waiting for other players to join so that they could hop into the server. But the mini games actually gained huge popularity on their own, frequently having like over 130,000 concurrent users. So they became really popular, and any new content became focused around that mini game side. Essentially what happened after that, and I suppose some of the origin initially of why we set up in Northern Ireland, was on that network side, the need arose for an operations manager. And that role was filled by Ukie, who is from Derry, and he is the current CEO of Hypixel Studios. So then what happened essentially for us was Microsoft acquired Mojang. They changed their licensing agreement and essentially made it tougher for us to do what we wanted to do in game when it came to the modern side. So we were kind of at a fork in the road where we had to make a decision whether we navigate this new terrain or try something completely different. We chose the latter, and we announced Hytale in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I can go a bit deeper on the journey since then, if that's helpful. Yeah, so Hytale itself started life as basically a desire for effectively a modding team, about 5 to 10 people at that time, to do, and it's that ambition of doing all of the things they couldn't do in the kind of sandbox they were working within on somebody else's technology and somebody else's game, from a design point of view, from a technology point of view, from a tools point of view, from a creative point of view. Very, very reactive, very responsive to their experience as community members, as modders becoming indie developers, which is like the first part of that journey, really. And so Hytale kind of started life as original technology, like an original block game engine, basically, in which to build that platform, with obviously the expectation, well actually, to be honest, like the initial assumption wasn't necessarily that it had to be a successor to what Hypixel had done before, but it was very clear that that's where the expertise was, that was where and honestly that's where the passion was, like, I appreciate that that's something everybody says, but there really was a really strong desire to take all that pent up desire to kind of take everything they'd learned as modders and like make their own thing and more broadly like go pro, right? Like become, and I say this hesitantly because I firmly believe that modding is game development, but become real developers, right? Like kind of like, to kind of enter the world, kind of, set up a studio around that. And then Hytale basically grew from being, obviously there's the assumption that we create some of the success of the Minecraft server, which is still going incidentally. It's a split in the company studios working on Hytale, but also gained aspirations in terms of the tooling and expanding that into sort of more advanced tooling for modders and content creators, and also onto the kind of adventure side of things, building a kind of more robust RPG within that block game sandbox kind of survival genre. And yeah, in 2018 we announced Hytale, and that's when I joined, and that's kind of why I joined, was to actually work on that announcement. A lot of things said in the previous talk are very relevant to this, in this experience in a lot of ways, to the extent that I've now had to encounter the pain of scaling Ukie up to 50 plus. I genuinely have, that's true.
It's on the airport over
the Belfast International to Derry Airport is a big item thing. Anyway, we didn't plan for that, and we learned that lesson. But nonetheless, what happened then, if people aren't aware, is the trailer got like an extraordinary response. Like one of those like lightning in a bottle things you cannot plan for, and you have to be very humble in the face of when it happens. A couple of weeks ago, we had 60 million views on that announcement trailer, and it just sort of changed everything. I should stress this was a team of like 20 to 30 people at the time, suddenly pulling numbers and attention and all of it, which is incredibly exciting and incredibly daunting and incredible generally, but also means you suddenly have to take a real serious look about what you're doing, how you're going to do it, how you're going to meet those expectations, and so on. And that takes us into what's happened since in the intervening 5 years.
So you mentioned a couple of times there about coming from modding backgrounds, and the modding scene is a very tight community by itself anyway, but then that's also expanded out into the community that was using the original Hypixel servers, or the Hypixel networks, or Hypixel, sorry, Hypixel. So does that kind of like having that access to that immediate community, is that something that persists with the new work that Hypixel is doing? How does that kind of community fit into your ongoing development of Hypixel itself?
That's a really interesting question. There's a lot in that. So it's evolved, is what I would say, right? Because one thing I should say is I think neither is actually from the original Microsoft, right? But obviously that's where that initial kind of sort of supply of inspiration comes from, and sensitivities to the kind of sometimes call them pain points, but like the blockers encountered by modders in that particular game at that particular time, and that's still we're still very much driven by that, and very much driven to kind of respond to that and build something around that. I think what's happened since is I put it two ways. One is Hypixel has gained its own community. We've gained, that's distinct in some ways from the Minecraft side, and it's got. And this is one of the things that's kind of most precious to us in the many years we're taking to develop this game, is having people creatively invest before it's out, and to the extent that one of our concept artists now, Nick, came from that community, right? Came directly from people doing fan art of Hypixel, so that's almost like a direct link. That's a really direct example of people coming in and informing the game. I think more broadly, the scale of the response we received meant that we had to look wider and understand why it resonated not just with the original community, which is still so kind of prevalent in kind of our minds, but also like lots of creators in different ways it kind of resonates with what we wanted to do. And so that's there's many different sides to that, and you could go into the weeds on it a little bit, but there's a lot about kind of learning to kind of zoom out a little bit and see kind of what can you do for creative people wanting to create either game content or content around your game more broadly than simply responding to the pain points you encountered as a model, for example, right? Like going a little bit wider with the world. But I think, I'm trying to think of another way of phrasing it, but basically like going from knowing really well one community and how they work to knowing kind of more a bit about how those communities work together and like what their needs are. And that sort of process of maturation, I think, is kind of important. And that's something that's come with growth, basically.
So you talked there about like obviously one member of that community is now directly employed, contributing to the new game, and that's probably something that's facilitated by having a remote studio. So I think Hypixel describes itself as remote first and remote focused geodiverse company. So Holly, could you tell us a little bit about what that means, and also then like day to day, what impact does that have on how Hypixel?
Yeah, of course. So obviously we were even remote before COVID hit. We've always been a remote studio. We've grown from that background. Essentially, for us, as I mentioned, Noxie is from Derry, the current CEO of Hypixel, and we also had kind of another person who semi-accompanied us on our journey into that development of Hypixel, and that was Sean McCafferty, who's now the current CEO of Hypixel. So they kind of met a long time ago on their own project over at Dirtwater Studios called Dogfighter. Sean ultimately left the industry to support his family, so Noxie had a bit of persuading to do to get him back on board and get him back in. But it didn't take too much because, as you know, games are in the heart, and once you've kind of had that experience, you always want to go back to it. So we had a really deep affinity for game development, but also a really deep affinity for growing that industry here in Northern Ireland. So the decision was made. We did have the opportunity to set up the studio closer to Riot in LA, but having that background here, having that kind of ties to Northern Ireland, understanding the pain points of the industry itself, which I'm sure a lot of you in this room have experienced as well. We wanted to kind of grow that here, give back to the community. So we made the decision to open offices in the city centre of Derry, and they opened in May of 2020, the same time as COVID. So that was a fun couple of years for us, and out of lockdown, but we wanted to make it like a little slice of Silicon Valley. We moved into this huge shell of red brick, which is kind of bare bones office, and we wanted to really make it our own. So we hired in like an artist from Strasbourg to paint a wall mural that takes pride of place at the entrance of the office. We have like a streaming room, we have some really cool facilities within the office, and we're dog friendly too, so I bring my dog to work pretty much every day, which I talk about a lot if any of you have ever heard me speak before. But yeah, so ultimately we set up the offices to house our operations and QA team, but being a kind of remote first global studio, it provided a great hub too for our teams who were around the world to come and visit. So last year we held a tech summit where we had every member of our tech team come to the office in Derry, just to have, obviously FaceTime is still important as well, being a remote studio. So it does provide a hub for our teams to come, hop on and visit whenever they want, and have that valuable FaceTime. But it's also good for us to kind of build relationships with the broader and the global team, and we've had to really navigate how we do that. So for communication-wise, we do use a mixture of Slack and TeamSpeak. So on TeamSpeak, we have our own little offices we can hop in and out of during the day. We have a watercolour room, just as if you were at a watercolour in an office and you were catching up with people. And then on Slack, we have like a huge number of channels. Some of them obviously are discipline focused. There's a lot of general channels, studio general channels, but there's also a lot of off-topic channels from food, fitness, pets, video games, board games, where you can really get to know other members of your team, and how they like to work and what their interests are, so that when you do meet up, you can chat with them about their interests and just learn more, I suppose, about your team members as well. So it's worked great for us. We have no plans to really change that. The office is running great, and we're really collaborative with the global team as well, which has been a huge success for us.
So can you tell us a little bit about what the distribution of the team across the globe is?
23 countries we're currently in now. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey for us, I suppose. As Chris said, there was 25, 30 people when both of us joined, and we're now, I think we've just hired our 112th employee as of last week. So we've had a lot of growth, and retaining that growth has been so important for us as well. We have a very strong culture at Hypixel. There's a lot of open trust and communication and transparency, which works really well for us. The respect is very much both ways. The passion is very much both ways. So it's been great. We are kind of globally dispersed, and we do work in, in golden hours, but they suit the majority of the team. We're not fans of crunch culture. We have great work-life balance, and we're very autonomous with each other. So it's been a great experience, and it works very well.
So, and then is there anything specifically about Derry that brings a benefit to the people that are based there?
I suppose it's giving back to the community. We've hired most of the operations on the QA team are local. We've hired a few people we have 2 relocation programs for people who have obviously left Northern Ireland in search of opportunities that weren't here previously, which are called One Up and One Home. So it just encourages people to come back. So we've relocated a couple of people from Dublin and Belfast. We've released One Home and had a couple of people relocate back home from England. So it's been a great initiative for us to really get back to not only locally but nationally as well, to bring people home, and for the realisation that there is opportunities in tech and just more specifically games here as well.
And so you mentioned the acquisition by Riot. So could you both talk just a little bit in general about, you've already mentioned the sea change that happened with the initial response to that trailer, but then with that acquisition, what changed, what did it unlock, what was that experience like?
I can speak to this a bit, I guess, because I was there. It's been sorry, excuse me. Excuse me, sorry. I'm just going to test. Yeah, there it is. Sorry. Can I get a glass of water? Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. So the sort of, obviously when you get a lot of attention on a project that doesn't have a publisher, is an independent project, the games industry comes looking, right? You attract a lot of attention, particularly kind of obviously the way that the game was reacted to. And I think it became really apparent to those of us there at the time that kind of needed both obviously resources, but also just sort of advice, ability to scale in order to deliver on the expectations that we had. And there was a pre-existing relationship with Riot because they were angel investors in the kind of initial establishing of Hypixel Studios. But more broadly, there was a kind of affinity there around particularly around like building games around communities to some extent, and that was kind of a good fit. And the process of what I would say is, and I think a lot about how kind of obviously our story is pretty unique in a bunch of ways, and I was kind of, it was a good point that was raised earlier about a lot of stories about marketing, but also the industry in general can trend towards survivorship bias and so on, right? You can end up giving advice that's very specific to the situation you find yourself in, and it certainly feels like a fairly unique one. What I would say, one of the things I'd say was like almost like a real benefit of the acquisition process and acquisition subsequently. Beyond obviously the resources which are so important to us being able to deliver this thing, is being encouraged to really be humble and clinical about your own thinking, right? You can to kind of analyze your own hype to some extent, really find out what's at the basis of it, and in some ways, acquisition, if it's a healthy process, I think, can be about kind of exposing, is there actually something here, right? Is there something that someone else will kind of validate with their interest, or even their kind of business interest, and so. I guess to that extent, one of the things was that helped attract us to kind of Riot as now our parent company was that the questions they were asking us, the things they wanted to know, the things they wanted to see us prove out about what we wanted to do were really strongly aligned with what we cared about and what we wanted to do. And that was a really good indicator that we were pulling in the same direction. And several years on, I think I can say that's proved out, right? Like, so to be clear, we're operationally independent. We do kind of, we have our own, we're kind of a standalone company on our own, right? We draw on Riot's kind of resources and expertise, basically, and obviously they have some oversight. And what we found is that initial process of kind of sounding out, like what is their interest, or what do they find compelling about this project? Can we prove out that we can deliver that thing? Does our idea have legs ultimately? That was really healthy. And because even though obviously it's super exciting to get so much hype around the game, I think it's also important to be humble and recognize that hype is a force, but you have to kind of be able to kind of really look clinically at it and identify what you're making for whom, which is the most important thing, and what steps you need to take to get there. And in our case, I think acquisition actually helped us identify those things, and then the added benefit of giving us the ability to scale to do it, basically.
So sorry. So you mentioned there about the importance of being humble and hype being a driving force, and having a good relationship with it. Like, how do you ensure that across a company that's now 112 employees? Like, how does it work that you're making sure that everybody's kind of responding to this hype in a way that matches how the company wants to?
Do you mean in terms of like how people conduct themselves on social media, or do you mean?
No, I guess I just mean like more internally, like, because it's it's very easy to get excited by that kind of hype, but and as an individual, it's you understand how you kind of talk to yourself about that, but when you're trying to support or understand your staff and their relationship to it, like what does that look like on a?
Yeah, I think the key thing is, I think we're in a fortunate position now where we have a very open internal creative process, which allows, really open. We believe a lot in like blowing out brainstorming sessions early in the project. Now, bringing us slightly to the side of the question, and there's a reason I think this is important, where we treat our, we still try and treat the whole studio as kind of like stakeholders in the project as a whole. And we have like a very kind of intentional process of expanding out that kind of process of that initial brainstorm around a feature or a creature or a faction or whatever it is, and bringing in ideas from the studio regardless of role, and having that filter down to the game to build a sense of twofold, obviously like real investment in the game, but also a real understanding of what we're making and why. And that, I think, can also be a way for people to channel their own kind of feelings about that direction. Because really, I think what you see is, I think we're in a fortunate place at the moment where the buzz around the game is pretty positive, right? We see exciting ideas and so on. And where that can be a challenge, I think, for developers is making sure that people are aligned around the vision, right? That we're not necessarily always in a position to respond to the latest ideas somebody's had online or something like that, right? That's not to say that's how important it is, but it needs to be held in balance with broader objectives and keeping everyone on the same page and all the things that larger studios contend with. And I think having those kind of opportunities for people to kind of raise their hands and put their ideas on a giant mirror board is the key. is really important for kind of sort of both giving people an opportunity to take the things they've been excited to see out in the world or the hype they've seen and kind of channel that into the game in a productive way. And then the second part of it is we don't necessarily like really try and avoid making anyone feel that they're kind of beholden to like a social media policy or anything like that. But what we have done is make sure that there's like good support available at all times, because energized online communities can be really exciting for some people and really intimidating for others, is the truth. And being able to offer support in both cases, I think is really important. But I don't think there's a golden rule for that. I think it's about reactive support and having sort of people in the position to answer questions at the right time, basically.
Yep, so no more questions then. Can everybody join me in thanking Chris and Holly?